I am Maren Whitlow, and I was born to disappoint. Not because I lacked ambition. God, no. I had dreams big enough to stitch across the sky. But in a house like mine, dreams were only worth something if they came with a framed diploma, a title, and a line of society page clout. My mother, Phyllis, was a radiologist with a poker face sharper than any scalpel. My father, Dorian, chaired a surgical board and answered phone calls like they were national emergencies. My older brother, Trent, ran a biotech startup that once made it into Forbes's bottom right corner. My younger sister, Cressida, was doing a dual MD PhD at Yale and once won a grant for, I don't even remember, some gene therapy thing. She explained it over dinner once and no one let me change the subject. And then there was me, the black sheep in vintage Levi's. I used to joke that I was the family's designated creative accident. I sketched during chem class, painted on the insides of cereal boxes, and turned thrift store curtains into jackets that raised eyebrows even at the farmer's market. My parents once told me during a very calm yet surgical intervention that art is for hobbies, not for humans. I was 16. I never cried in front of them again. But before I tell you how my biggest failure turned into a national headline, before I walk you into the dinner that changed everything, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You'll want to see how this ends. Anyway, they say you can't choose your family, but you can choose who you become. I used to believe that being myself meant shrinking into corners they didn't look. I used to believe that love came after achievement. And that I was always one career choice away from finally being invited into the warmth. Spoiler, that warmth wasn't real. It was conditional. It was polished and cold and always followed by "but you did well, but not as well as Trent." That's interesting, but have you thought about a real job? Your designs are nice, but it's not sustainable in the long run. I stopped trying to convince them and started investing in my own silence. I took night shifts at a boutique that specialized in repurposed fabrics. I stitched in the back room, hands calloused and heart aching but full. I sold 2 jackets on Etsy, then 10. Then I started an Instagram page under the name Woven Truths. No bio, no face, just designs. People noticed. Strangers sent me voice notes saying my patterns made them feel braver. One woman wore one of my coats to her divorce hearing. A guy proposed to his girlfriend wearing one of my unisex embroidered jackets because, as he put it, she said yes to my coat first. But none of that mattered back home. Back home, at Sunday brunch, they asked how I was doing without benefits. They joked that my clothes were noble in theory but not scalable. One time, my mother handed me a brochure for a 6-week accelerated nursing certification. I told her I was making more money than I ever had. She asked me what my backup plan was. You don't argue with a surgeon's precision, you just let the cut happen and clean your own wounds. Still, I wasn't bitter. I was building something, quietly, fiercely, secretly, and if it broke me, so what? I'd rather be broken on my own terms than whole on theirs. And then came the design grant, $250,000, national press, a jury of icons, a short list of 5, and Maren Whitlow, daughter of disappointment, sitting there with an invite in my inbox and the kind of silence in my apartment that only dreams know how to make. Except one thing stood in the way of full elation: the annual Whitlow dinner. It was 2 days before the award ceremony, non-negotiable, family only. Full attendance expected, 1 evening, 1 table, 1 long performance of Legacy and Illusion, and this year I was supposed to host. I thought about skipping it, but something in me, some old ache, wanted them to see me, just once, on the edge of something real, something too big to ignore. And so I RSVP'd. Yes. The thing about being invisible is, you start believing you were born that way. My earliest memories aren't of birthdays or lullabies, they're of waiting. Waiting to be noticed, waiting to be asked something more than, "Can you move?" I was the quiet one, which made it easier for them to forget. But I wasn't silent, I just stopped talking around people who didn't listen. When I was 9, I won first place in an art contest at the community center. The theme was "What the World Needs," and I'd painted a girl planting recycled shoes as if they were seeds. It wasn't perfect, my proportions were off, and I used too much red, but the judges said it showed vision. I ran home holding the certificate like it was a trophy. Mom looked up from her surgical journal and said, "That's cute, Maren." Then asked if I'd cleaned my room. Dad didn't look up. He was on the phone talking about malpractice insurance. The next month, Trent got a B+ in math and the whole house buzzed like we'd just won the lottery. Dad took him to a steakhouse. I got his leftovers. By the time I hit high school, I'd learned to expect very little. I never invited them to school exhibitions. I stopped leaving my drawings on the fridge. It was easier that way, less humiliating. Senior year, I landed an internship with a local textile lab working on zero-waste garment prototypes. I came home glowing, covered in thread, babbling about how circular fashion could transform landfill metrics. Mom blinked twice and handed me a flyer for a college pre-med boot camp. "I don't think you're hearing me," I said. "I am," she replied. "I just know what you'll regret later." Even when I got into my dream arts program with a scholarship, the celebration was muted. They were proud, sure. In that way, you're proud of a neighbor's kid who tried their best. Dad actually clapped. Once. Cressida patted my back like I was a foster puppy who hadn't peed on the rug. The bar was so low, I tripped over it. College was better, but even there, I couldn't shake the need to prove myself. I pulled all-nighter stitching portfolios that made my hands bleed. I built thesis collections from second-hand material and modeled them on classmates under flickering dorm lights. I paid rent with babysitting gigs and freelance catalog work. I graduated with honors. The kind they didn't fly in for. At my graduation, I looked out at the sea of clapping parents and recognized none of the faces. No Dorian in a stiff blazer, no Phyllis holding flowers she wouldn't have chosen herself. They'd emailed me a congratulations message that morning. It said, "We're glad you're happy. Let us know when you apply to grad school." I cried for exactly 4 minutes in a Taco Bell parking lot. That's when I made a promise to myself. I wasn't going to beg for validation anymore. I was going to earn it. From the world, if not from them. It wasn't always clean, that drive. It turned me into someone obsessive. I hoarded compliments from strangers like rationed water. I read every DM on my brand account 3 times over. Sometimes I wanted to scream, "Do you see me now?" But then I'd remember the nights I curled up next to my sewing machine, humming old Motown songs while stitching meaning into fabric scraps. And I'd remember, this wasn't about revenge, this was about me. Still, it's hard to shake the ache. When your parents only love the polished version of you, you learn to hide the parts that don't sparkle. So even when Woven Truth started gaining traction, even when Vogue reposted my patchwork kimono jacket, I didn't tell them. Not really. I sent a vague text about doing well and having some small wins. Dad responded with a thumbs up. When Cressida won a research grant, there was a dinner. When Trent landed a Series B investment, there were engraved champagne flutes. When I was interviewed on a podcast that reached 300,000 listeners, my mother sent me a link to an NPR article titled "The Pitfalls of Social Media Validation." You'd think I'd stop caring. I wanted to. God, I tried. But there's something about the people who raised you, how their silence echoes longer than anyone else's voice. Which brings us back to that damn dinner. It was supposed to be just another performance, one I'd survived before. Forks clinking, side eyes darting, Trent casually dropping IPO into conversation while Mom polished her pearls with judgment. But this time, something in me stirred. Maybe it was the looming award ceremony. Maybe it was the memory of that art contest when I was 9. Maybe it was that I had finally built something real, something that mattered, and I wanted them to know it, even if they didn't clap. It started with a broken zipper and a thrift store rack no one had touched in weeks. I was 24, working part-time at a minimalist boutique downtown, the kind where everything looked like it cost more than rent but didn't fit anyone with hips. A customer had brought in a linen jumpsuit with a busted side seam. It wasn't our item. We didn't do repairs, but she looked tired, like someone who'd fought to get dressed that day. I offered to fix it after hours. She came back the next day, blinking at the reworked seam and the tiny embroidery I'd added near the cuff, just a silver thread sprout curling upward. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, out of nowhere, she started crying. "It feels like someone saw me," she whispered. That moment cracked something open. That night, I dug through my old sketchbooks. Pages of asymmetrical dresses, deconstructed coats, silhouettes that hugged and draped in ways that felt like armor and softness all at once. I'd been collecting materials for years: vintage fabrics, recycled knits, even upholstery offcuts from a couch company that went under during the pandemic. I started experimenting again. But this time, with purpose. I wasn't trying to be cool. I was trying to be honest. The idea came one night while watching a documentary about indigenous weaving traditions and climate grief. I thought, what if sustainability wasn't just a buzzword, but a design language? Not just what we wore, but why we wore it. So I built Woven Truths. At first, it was a tiny Etsy shop, 3 listings, awful lighting, my friend Holly modeling in my kitchen. I sold 2 coats in a week, then 5 more in a month. Then an influencer posted a reel wearing my upcycled patch jacket with the caption, "This piece has soul." Orders tripled overnight. I stayed up till 3 a.m. most nights, cutting fabric, responding to messages, packaging with hand-signed notes that read, "You deserve to be seen." I didn't tell anyone, not my family, not even my roommates. It was mine, my sacred thing. I built a website. Then came the brand mission: wear your truth, waste nothing, feel everything. I donated 10% of every sale to mental health nonprofits. I wrote blog posts about body politics and fashion ethics. I turned my little apartment into a production line and converted my closet into fabric storage. A fashion blogger in Toronto called my asymmetrical wrap coat a wearable reckoning. I cried for an hour after. And then, the grant. I'd heard about the Millfield Award from a former classmate. It was the biggest sustainable design honor in the country. Past winners had landed collabs with legacy brands. It came with $250,000 in exhibition and press coverage for months. I almost didn't apply. I told myself I wasn't ready, that it was too big, too soon. But something inside whispered, apply anyway. So I did. I hit submit and went back to sewing, expecting nothing. 6 weeks later I was shortlisted. Final 5. I almost dropped my phone when I saw the email. My knees buckled. I called Holly. She screamed. The application had included images of my pieces, my essays about regenerative design, and even a video of me hand-dyeing old denim with onion skin and beetroot. The judges said my collection wasn't just clothing. It was storytelling. It gave grief a shape and resilience a body. I couldn't believe it. After years of being dismissed, I was suddenly in rooms where people listened, where they cared. I wanted to call my mom. I stared at her contact name for 20 minutes, but I didn't press dial, because I knew what she'd say. Don't let this distract you from finding something stable. Or worse, that's nice, Marin. So I kept it quiet. Again. Even when Woven Truths got featured in a digital mag alongside other sustainability pioneers, even when a brand consultant offered to invest, I didn't tell them. I wasn't ready. Not yet. But now? The final event was in 3 days. I was flying to New York. The exhibition would be streamed live. And 2 days before that? The Whitlow family dinner. I looked at the invite my mother had sent 6 weeks prior. Montecito, 7 p.m. sharp, cocktail attire, RSVP expected. No mention of dietary preferences, no indication she knew I hadn't eaten red meat in 5 years. I could already smell the lamb roast in silent expectations. I could have said no. I could have claimed illness, a scheduling conflict, divine intervention, but something in me needed them to see the version of me that wasn't waiting anymore. Not for permission, not for applause, not for love that came with terms and conditions. So I ironed my best tailored jumpsuit, stitched from 3 vintage curtains and 1 heartbreak, and I told myself, let them watch. The day of the dinner, I woke up already rehearsing answers I'd never get to finish. It was the kind of morning where even my coffee tasted nervous. I double-checked the RSVP confirmation I'd sent my mother 2 weeks ago. No reply. Typical. She only responded to confirmations from institutions, not people. I packed my garment bag for New York early, just in case I had to rush to LAX after surviving dinner intact. The Grant exhibition was 48 hours away, but tonight felt heavier. I spent most of the afternoon working on a final fitting for a client. A sculptural coat made from a wool cashmere blend rescued from a shuttered theater's curtains. It smelled faintly of dust and forgotten applause, which felt poetic. I steamed it slowly, letting the rhythm of the work calm my hands. At 5 p.m., I got in the car and started the drive up to Montecito. I hadn't been to the estate in over a year. The Whitlow home sat behind wrought iron gates, like some cold marble monument to self-importance. 5 acres of meticulously arranged rose gardens, a koi pond no one maintained anymore, and a driveway that curled like a judgmental eyebrow. As I pulled up, my stomach sank. It wasn't just the house, it was the history inside it. The feeling of always arriving on the wrong frequency. I parked, exhaled, reapplied lipstick with a steadier hand than I expected, then stepped out into the evening air like someone headed into battle with a smile stitched on tight. The door opened before I knocked. Cressida stood there in a linen pantsuit the color of dental equipment, her expression already loaded. "Well, look who made it," she said, with a sideways hug that landed more like a shoulder nudge. "Didn't think your calendar had room for us plebeians," I smiled. "Always time for roast lamb and parental disappointment." She blinked, caught between offense and amusement, then turned on her heel. The house hadn't changed. Same stiff velvet couches, same impressionist paintings no one could name. The chandelier above the dining table still looked like it was trying too hard. I walked into the dining room and was greeted by the usual cast. Trent, in his ever-present Patagonia vest over a button-down, was mid-conversation with my father about seed funding. Phyllis stood at the bar cart stirring something martini-shaped. My Aunt Rowena had shown up too, which meant the evening would include at least 3 unsolicited comments about fertility. "Darling," my mother said, barely brushing my cheek with hers, "that's quite a unique outfit." I was wearing a full-length indigo duster coat with asymmetrical seams and a cinched waist over tailored wide-leg pants made from deadstock denim. It was both dramatic and subtle. Like me. "Thanks," I replied. "It's one of mine." She blinked. "Ah, no compliment. Not even the illusion of one." Dinner was served at 7:05 on the dot. My father made a toast all about legacy and family and how Whitlows never settle for mediocrity. The irony hung in the air like overcooked asparagus. We passed dishes, we talked weather. Trent recapped his latest pitch meeting. Cressida described a new study she was co-authoring. I chewed and smiled and kept my responses to a polite minimum. I waited for the question. It always came eventually. It was a tradition, like the lamb. "So, Marin," Trent finally said, leaning back with his wine glass. "Still making jackets?" There it was, still making art, I replied. "But yes, jackets too." My mother looked up. "And that's enough to pay rent now?" I could have answered a dozen ways, with data, with sarcasm, with the truth. Instead, I smiled. "I've figured it out." There was a pause, that kind of pause that feels like a seesaw creaking under tension. "Well," my father muttered, "as long as you're not asking for help." "I wouldn't," I said quietly. Aunt Rowena chimed in. "Do you still have health insurance?" "Jesus. Independent artist doesn't mean uninsured, Rowena." My mother sighed, one of those long, disappointed exhalations that said more than any words. "It's just that we worry, darling. It's a hard world out there for people who don't make sound choices." There it was again, the suggestion that I had chosen a life of soft failure. I cut into my lamb. "Good thing I make sharp ones, then." The table went quiet. I looked around at them, all so perfectly postured, so endlessly rehearsed, and suddenly the exhaustion hit me like a freight train. I didn't belong here. I never had. But still, I stayed, because the next 48 hours would change everything. And if I had to endure one more performance to make the reveal taste sweeter, so be it. The real show was coming. I've heard people say family dinners are sacred. Mine felt more like court proceedings. The Whitlow dining room, with its long mahogany table and crystal that only came out for tax-deductible holidays, wasn't built for warmth. It was built for optics, for the illusion of closeness. Each seat had history, hierarchies that hadn't shifted since I was 12 and too scared to ask for seconds. This time, I sat across from my father, diagonal from my mother, with Cressida and Trent flanking the head of the table like loyal defense attorneys. The meal unfolded the way it always did. Professionally prepared, emotionally undercooked. "So, Marin," Cressida began between bites of broccolini, "how's the passion project going?" Her tone was dipped in sugar and condescension, just enough to make it seem polite. I stirred my wine. "Well," I said, "it's a business now. We just fulfilled our 1,000th order last week." Trent raised an eyebrow. 1,000 jackets? That's cute. Must be exhausting though, all that sewing." I smiled tightly. "Well, I have a team now. I'm not in a basement, with a needle and a candle, if that's what you're picturing." Cressida chimed in. "Maybe if you weren't so defensive." Maybe if you weren't so dismissive, I snapped. Silence. Heavy, awkward silence that blanketed the table like thick fog. My mother stood. Enough. This isn't productive. Of course it wasn't. Productive in Whitlow terms meant agreeable. It meant smiling while being minimized. I'm sorry, I said, gathering my clutch. I didn't come here to fight. I came here because, for once, I thought maybe you'd be proud. Not performatively. Just genuinely. I looked around the table and saw only stunned faces. No one moved. No one said my name. That was when I realized they'd never really known me. They just knew who I refused to become. I rose from the table and turned toward the foyer, heart thudding. And then right as my fingers grazed the front door handle, my phone buzzed. Unknown caller. New York area code. I stared at the screen. One call. One moment. Everything was about to change. I didn't answer the call right away. I just stood there, frozen, phone glowing in my hand, the cold steel of the front door handle beneath my fingers. Somewhere behind me, someone coughed. Probably my dad. Someone always coughed when the energy in the room got too thick for silence to carry on comfortably. The phone kept buzzing. Unknown caller. 9117 area code. That was New York. I took one breath, then another. Then answered. Hello? A warm voice greeted me. Hi, is this Maren Whitlow? This is her. This is Kendra Lockwood from the Millfield Design Foundation. I know it's a bit late, but I couldn't wait. There was a pause, my throat closed. You've won, Maren. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My mind blanked. My stomach dropped. It felt like falling and flying at the same time. You've won the national award. The board just finalized the vote. Your work was described as visionary, radically human, and one of the most moving applications we've ever received. The exhibition is yours. The prize money is yours. The press, they're going to eat this up. I gripped the door handle harder, like I needed to physically anchor myself. Kendra kept talking. Details about the press release, when to expect the formal paperwork, the live stream schedule. Her voice sounded far away, like it was echoing across a canyon I hadn't realized I'd crossed. Are you okay? She finally asked. I blinked. Tears had welled without warning. I'm okay, I said. I'm more than okay. I'll let you process. We'll talk tomorrow, but congratulations, Maren. You earned every stitch of this. I hung up. The silence behind me was no longer just awkward. It was suspicious. I turned around slowly, phone still in hand. Cressida had her eyebrows raised. Trent was mid-sip of wine frozen. Aunt Rowena had stopped chewing. My mother, standing stiffly by the sideboard, narrowed her eyes like a hawk clocking a sudden change in wind. What was that? She asked, voice clipped. I looked at her, and I smiled. That, I said, was the Millfield Foundation. I just won the National Sustainable Design Award. No one spoke. I walked back toward the table, slowly, the weight of the moment pressing against my spine like heat. I'll be flying to New York tomorrow. My designs will be featured at the event. It's the biggest stage in the country for what I do. Trent set his wine down. Wait, the Millfield? The one that Vogue sponsors, I said lightly. Yes, Cressida tilted her head. You applied for that? You never said anything. I didn't think you'd be interested. I assumed you'd be more focused on Cressida's CRISPR funding or Trent's venture debt round. My mother stepped forward slowly. Maren, that's a big deal. Yes, I said. It is. Rowena let out a low chuckle. Well now, who knew you had it in you? That phrase. Had it in you. Like I'd pulled off some fluke. Like this was a stroke of luck, not years of grit they never bothered to ask about. I always had it in me, I said, voice sharp but calm. You just didn't look. They were all blinking. Like deer. Like computers buffering. I almost felt bad. Almost. Phyllis recovered first. This is wonderful news, darling. Truly, we should celebrate. Champagne? I laughed out loud, a dry, startled kind of laugh that cracked open everything I'd been holding in for years. Celebrate? I repeated. Now you want to celebrate? Well, you're a Whitlow, my father said. We're proud of success. That's all we've ever wanted for you. No, I said, voice steady. You wanted control. You wanted obedience. You wanted a version of me that made sense on your resume. You didn't want this messy, hungry, stitched-together version that built something without your approval. Don't be cruel, my mother snapped, her face tightening. I looked at her. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what she saw when she looked at me. I'm not being cruel, I'm being honest, something you've never been able to handle. There it was. The line, the moment, the full rupture. Don't act like you supported me, I added. You tolerated me, barely. You dismissed every win, minimized every risk, and now that there's a check and a headline, suddenly I'm worth inviting to the table. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was earned. I reached for my coat, the one I'd made from the curtains of my first apartment. I have a flight to catch in the morning. I'll be staying with friends tonight. Marin, wait, Cressida started. I shook my head. You've had years to listen. I'm not repeating myself now. As I walked to the door, I turned one last time. I didn't come here for validation. I came to see if you'd changed. I opened the door. You haven't. And I stepped out. Into the night. Into myself. Into a world that was finally opening up. Not because they let me in, but because I kicked down the door. I didn't cry until I was halfway down the coast. I don't even know what cracked me. Maybe it was the silence in the car, or the familiar curves of Highway 101 lit by soft amber street lamps, or the way my phone kept buzzing with names I didn't want to see. Missed call from Mom. Text from Cressida. We need to talk. A single-word message from Trent. Seriously? I tossed the phone into the passenger seat and let the tears come. Not because I was sad. Not really. It was something deeper. That strange mix of grief and relief that hits when you finally walk away from something that's been poisoning you for years. Like escaping a burning house you never realized was on fire until you smelled the smoke in your hair. But underneath it all, there was something else. A buzz in my chest. A kind of trembling electricity that said, "It's real, it's happening, you did it." I pulled off into a gas station, wiped my face with a napkin from the glove box, and checked my phone again. One new voicemail. From an unknown number. I hit play. Hi Marin, this is Rachel Freeman from the Thread Report. We just saw the Millfield announcement and wanted to see if you'd be open to an exclusive feature. Your work is incredible. We're calling this the Whitlow Surprise. Give me a ring when you can. I laughed. Actually, laughed. Alone in the driver's seat next to a vending machine that smelled like mildew. The Whitlow Surprise. I'd spent my whole life being the afterthought. The disappointment, the one who didn't follow the plan. And now, I was the headline. I pulled back onto the road and drove straight to Holly's apartment. She lived in a cozy 2-bedroom above a bakery in Echo Park. When she opened the door in her pajamas and saw my face, she didn't ask anything. She just opened her arms and held me until my bones remembered how to feel safe. We made tea. She gave me socks with cats on them. We sat on the floor like we were in college again, surrounded by her dog-eared design books and potted plants named after literary villains. So, she said eventually, her eyes warm. Did it happen? I nodded. I won. She screamed so loud the neighbor banged on the wall. We drank cheap Prosecco from coffee mugs. She made me promise to sleep before my flight. I didn't. My brain wouldn't shut off. I lay awake on her couch, staring at the ceiling fan, running through everything. What I'd say in my speech, what dress to wear, whether or not to block my mom's number for good. At 5 a.m. I opened Instagram and saw a flood of new followers. Mentions, comments, DMs. One woman wrote, "Your jacket made me cry. I didn't know clothes could say something my mouth never could." I cried again. Quietly, messily, fully. Later that morning at LAX I checked in my garment bag like it was made of gold. TSA almost unwrapped one of my pieces. Holly had to gently threaten them with fashion journalism Twitter. We boarded the flight with nervous giggles and 3 kinds of trail mix. When the plane lifted off, I stared out the window and whispered thank you to no one in particular. Thank you to the client with the broken zipper, to the onion skins that dyed my denim, to the loneliness that forced me to build a world that didn't already exist, to the kid who once painted a girl planting shoes and believed she could grow anything. My phone buzzed once more. A message from an old professor. They're calling you the future of fashion. But I always knew. I smiled. That night, I walked into the Millfield exhibit space in Lower Manhattan with my spine straighter than it had ever been. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, spotlights cradling each garment like art. And there, at the center on a mannequin wrapped in light, my coat, my truth. A journalist asked, "How does it feel to be the industry's dark horse?" I looked right at the camera and said, "I'm not the dark horse. I'm just the one who didn't need a pedigree to gallop." The applause came later, the feature spread, the investment offers, the interviews, But none of that compared to the moment when I realized I didn't need them to see me. I had finally seen myself. The press whirlwind was louder than I expected, but strangely, I didn't feel overwhelmed. For the first time, I felt anchored. Every headline, every interview, every voice memo from a stranger thanking me for making beauty that breathes, they weren't about validation. They were receipts, proof that my quiet years had not been wasted, that all the late nights, the stitched fingers, the cold meals, the ignored texts, they had meaning. They built this. By the second day in New York, I'd already received 3 partnership proposals. A showroom in Brooklyn wanted to feature my next capsule. A sustainable fashion nonprofit asked if I'd speak at their summit. Vogue reached out to schedule a Q&A. And then, the one I hadn't expected. The Today Show. I almost dropped my phone reading the producer's email. They wanted to do a segment titled, From Invisible to Icon, The Rise of Maren Whitlow. I read the subject line twice. I could still hear my mother's voice, clear as a scalpel. Art is for hobbies, not humans. Yeah, Phyllis, you were wrong. And then, of course, they came crawling. It started small. A comment from Cressida on one of my Instagram posts, proud of you, sis, with a sparkle emoji. Then a text from my father, we watched the interview, impressive presentation, would love to talk strategy sometime. Then my mother, a voicemail, Maren, darling, your work is extraordinary. I mean it, we're all so proud. Your father and I were just saying how wonderful it would be to have you join us for the next Foundation Gala. They're looking for a speaker on innovation and we think you'd be perfect. Call me sweetheart, no apologies, no recognition of how they discarded me, just, now that you're shiny, come be our trophy. I stared at the phone like it had insulted me personally. Then, I laughed. That night I posted a photo from the exhibit. My coat, under the lights, captioned simply built in silence, worn in truth, no tags, no family mentions, just the truth, unfiltered. And then I made the call, to them. All 3 of them. I didn't scream, I didn't gloat, I didn't even raise my voice. I spoke clearly, with the calmness of someone who no longer needed anything. I appreciate you reaching out, I began. But I think we should be honest with each other. I could hear them bracing on the other end. You didn't support me when it counted. You mocked my choices, minimized my work, and made me feel like less than. And now that the world is clapping, you want to clap too. But this applause, it's not for you. You weren't in the room when I built what I built. Maren, don't be dramatic. My father started. I cut him off. No, I'm being factual. I understand you might feel, my mother tried. Don't finish that sentence, I said softly. This isn't about feelings, it's about memory, about pattern, and I'm done repeating it. There was silence. Of course there was. They'd never prepared for this version of me, the one who didn't need to beg, the one who no longer wanted back in. I wish you well, I finished, but from here on I choose peace, and peace means distance. Click. Not angry, just finished. I exhaled, like I'd been holding my breath for years. That same night I had dinner with my team, my real family. Holly, Marcus, Devon, Alina. We sat in a candlelit bistro and toasted to the weird little brand we had stitched together with courage and caffeine. To woven truths, Holly said, lifting her glass, and to the woman who turned rejection into revolution. I smiled, my heart full. To all the ones who dared to stay soft in a hard world. We clinked glasses. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was compensating for anything. I wasn't less than. I wasn't proving a point. I was just me, fully. The girl with the paint-stained fingers. The woman with a runway made of resilience, and no one could take that from me. The difference between chosen family and biological family isn't just love, it's the absence of conditions. I didn't fully understand that until the night we launched the Woven Truths winter collection. It was a modest celebration in a sunlit industrial loft in Silver Lake. Bare brick walls, strands of reclaimed light bulbs overhead, mismatched chairs we'd dragged in ourselves. Marcus DJ'd using a playlist he claimed had exactly 1 BPM of anxiety relief. Holly wore one of our earliest wrap coats, patched and redyed so many times it looked like a living quilt. Devon brought wine. Alina brought gluten-free cake and a tiny clay pin she made shaped like a seam ripper. I cried when she handed it to me. As guests trickled in, past clients, local artists, sustainability bloggers, people who'd found us through the podcast or the Millfield feature, I felt something I never felt at family dinners. Safe. No performance. No measuring stick, just warmth. People came up to me again and again, not just to compliment the designs but to share how they felt in them. "I wore your jacket to my custody hearing," one woman said, her eyes glassy. "It made me feel like someone who wins." "My daughter wears your hoodie to chemo," another whispered. "She says it feels like armor." Even the silent ones, the ones who just touched the fabric gently nodding, communicated something I never got from my own bloodline. Recognition. That night, when we dimmed the lights and screened our mini-documentary, 5 minutes of behind-the-scenes footage spliced with snippets of me talking about purpose, not perfection, the room went quiet. No phones, no chatter, just presence. And when the lights came back on, everyone stood and clapped. Not because they had to, but because they meant it. Later, after most people had left, we curled up on the studio's old couch, sipping ginger tea and reliving every moment. Holly curled her feet under her and grinned at me. "You're glowing," she said. "You always light up around your people." I laughed. Guess I finally found them. I thought about my actual family. Back in Montecito, probably reading about the launch in silence, or worse, pretending they hadn't seen it at all. I didn't feel bitterness anymore, just detachment. A quiet acceptance that some people only know how to love versions of you they understand. But love isn't understanding. Love is staying even when you don't. And these people, my team, my tribe, they stayed. Through the mess, through the pivots, through the days I collapsed into tears over a lost shipment, or a broken needle, or a nasty comment from someone who thought handmade meant unprofessional. They held me up when I was made of thread and tape. And now I was holding them too. At one point, Marcus said, "We should do a holiday dinner, potluck style, real family vibes." "Will there be lamb?" I joked. "Only if we source it from a cruelty-free heritage breed farm where the sheep give consent." We all howled with laughter. That night, as I walked home alone beneath a soft Los Angeles sky, I felt an ache that wasn't sadness. It was awe. I had lost a family I never really had, but I'd gained one I built with my own hands. No bloodlines, no trust funds, just shared truth passed from palm to palm like something sacred, and that was legacy, the kind no surname could define. It's amazing how peaceful life becomes when you stop arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding you. In the weeks following the award and the launch, I made a quiet vow. No more emotional debt. Not to my parents. Not to the version of myself that still winced every time I saw Mom on the caller ID. Not to any voice, internal or external, that asked me to shrink in order to be tolerated. I didn't cut them off dramatically. There was no big confrontation, no firestorm of texts or passive-aggressive emails. I just withdrew the energy, like finally closing a leaky faucet that had been quietly draining me for years. When my mother sent a formal invite to the Whitlow Family Foundation Gala, complete with suggested talking points for the speech they drafted on my behalf, I simply replied, "Thank you, I won't be attending. Wishing you a lovely evening." No apology, no explanation, just a boundary. Clean, clear, unshakable. That one sentence triggered a chain of emails from Cressida, starting polite and ending in all caps. I didn't reply. Trent called once, left a voicemail filled with vague guilt and references to opportunity and brand synergy. I deleted it. It was strange at first, this silence. I kept expecting some aftershock, some emotional tremor, but it never came. In its place, relief. Like stepping out of tight shoes and realizing your toes had been numb for years. With that space, I began building something more personal. My fortress. Not a fortress made of stone. One made of soft rituals and non-negotiables. I started my mornings slowly, with hands around a warm mug and feet bare on cool tile. I journaled, even if it was just nonsense. I blocked off design silence hours, no calls, no social, just me and the work. I made room in my calendar for joy that wasn't productive. Long walks, weird movies, sitting in bookstores reading fashion theory and fan fiction back to back. I started saying no without panic, yes without explanation. I even went to therapy. I told my therapist how I used to mistake rejection for instruction, how for years I thought that if I could just explain myself better, maybe they'd get it, maybe they'd stay. She nodded and said, "Sometimes it's not about explaining, it's about exiting." That line lived rent-free in my head for weeks. At Woven Truths, I implemented what we jokingly called emotional architecture. We restructured how we worked, not just for productivity but for people. We scheduled mental health days. We started Tuesday circles where no one talked business for an hour. We just checked in. Sometimes we laughed, sometimes we cried. But we showed up, fully. And strangely, with those new boundaries in place, our creativity soared. We launched a new capsule that sold out in 48 hours. Collaborations came in from indie magazines and textile schools wanting to use our process as case studies. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was chasing success, I was inhabiting it. One afternoon, I got a handwritten letter in the mail. From a client. A woman who'd worn one of our patchwork coats to a court hearing about her father's will. The letter read, "I walked into that room carrying myself like a person who matters. Thank you for making something that reminded me." I held the letter to my chest and let the tears fall. Not from pain, from wholeness. I realized then that this, not the interviews or the accolades, was what I'd always been trying to create. A life with texture, a life that held. No more begging for seats at tables that fed me crumbs. I was building my own. And the guest list was entirely mine. They say you can't rewrite your past, but you can decide what to do with the name it gave you. The Whitlow name had always felt like a fitted suit 2 sizes too tight. Polished, prestigious, but suffocating. A legacy tied to hospitals, endowments, a glossy newsletter for alumni nobody read. When I was younger, I used to dream about changing it, dropping it entirely, creating a new identity untouched by judgment or comparison. But now I wanted something different. I didn't want to burn it down. I wanted to redefine it. The idea came quietly, the way most of my ideas do. While I was unpicking the hem of a donated trench coat, repurposing it into a 2-toned rain cape for our spring line. The fabric had history, but it wasn't useless, it just needed reshaping. So I created the Whitlow Threads Initiative. It started as a small outreach program, monthly workshops teaching sustainable fashion design to teens from underserved communities. We partnered with a youth center in Boyle Heights and invited guest artists, stylists, textile historians. We didn't focus on perfection. We focused on voice, on making things that spoke. The kids blew me away. One girl turned an old tablecloth into a bomber jacket that looked like it belonged in Paris Fashion Week. A boy with a stutter designed a reversible hoodie inspired by Japanese armor. He named it Soft Shield. When I posted about the initiative online, the response was overwhelming. Donations poured in. Educators offered curriculum advice. A New York Times writer reached out for a piece titled "The Designer Who Stitched Her Name Back into Meaning." That headline hit me hard, because that's exactly what I was doing. I no longer needed to escape the name Whitlow, I just needed to untangle it, to separate legacy from expectation, biology from belonging. For the first time, I walked into spaces I used to shrink in, with my full name on my chest and no apology on my tongue. At one gallery show, someone introduced me to a group of sponsors as Maren Whitlow, founder of Woven Truths and director of the Whitlow Threads Initiative. I smiled. Not just out of pride, out of recognition. That was my name now. Not Dorian's daughter, not Phyllis's cautionary tale, not the artsy one. I was the story they never saw coming, and I was using their name to tell it better. It got back to them, of course. A family friend sent me a clipped article where my mother had given a quote. "It's lovely to see Maren continuing the Whitlow tradition of public service." As if we were all on the same side of history. But I didn't correct her, let her have her version. I had mine, and mine had substance. We expanded the initiative, launched a mini-grant for young designers creating with zero-waste principles, created a scholarship under my grandmother's name, Laverne Whitlow, the only woman in the family who ever told me my art was beautiful before anyone else did. She died when I was 13, but I could still hear her voice in every stitch. "Make something that feels like you." I did, Grandma. I really did. There was a moment, late one night, sitting in the studio alone with thread tangled around my wrist, when I whispered to the air, "I forgive you," to my parents, my siblings, myself. Not because they deserved it, but because I was tired of carrying them like unpaid rent. I forgave them, and then I let them go. Not with anger, with grace. Because that's what happens when you own your story. You stop needing to rewrite anyone else's. And suddenly the name stitched across my chest wasn't a burden anymore. It was mine. Peace doesn't arrive with a parade. It comes quietly, on a Tuesday morning maybe, while you're sipping coffee and noticing that your shoulders aren't clenched anymore. Mine came on the balcony of my apartment, just as the sun began to soften its grip on the city. The streets below buzzed faintly with life. Early dog walkers, the clink of cafe cups, someone practicing saxophone 3 buildings away. I sat barefoot, wrapped in a worn robe I'd made from a tapestry no one wanted at the thrift store, and I watched the sky stretch awake. My phone buzzed beside me, not with emails, not with family, just a simple message from Devon. The first class of Threads kids graduated. All of them finished their final pieces. One cried, so did I. I smiled. A bird landed on the railing. I whispered hello and didn't move. It stayed. That felt like a sign. I didn't need chaos anymore to feel alive. I didn't need applause to feel worthy. I had nothing to prove and everything to protect. That was peace. I thought back to the girl I used to be, the one who sat through dinners swallowing her voice like it might choke her, the one who clung to compliments like oxygen, the one who thought love had to be earned through sacrifice. She was gone, or maybe not gone, just integrated, grown, seen. I still had moments of ache, ghosts of old patterns that whispered, maybe you're still not enough. But now I had stronger voices inside me, ones that said, you are not a mistake, you are a masterpiece in motion. Woven truths had grown beyond me. We had a studio now, a small team of young designers who called our space a church without pews. Our clients weren't customers, they were witnesses, and every thread, every seam carried more than fabric. It carried memory, resistance, hope. I glanced at the notebook on my lap and scribbled something without thinking. Success isn't perfection, it's the freedom to define your own worth. And I believed it. Wholly. Finally, I didn't know what was next. Maybe a book, maybe a flagship space, maybe something quieter. All I knew was that whatever it was, it would come from a place of wholeness, not hunger. I stood, stretched and breathed in the morning. The air tasted different, lighter, and in that moment, alone with the bird and the sky and the hum of a city I had learned to love again, I felt something I never thought I would. Enough. I was enough. Always had been. Have you ever been told your dreams were too small, too strange, or just too far from what was expected of you? I have. And for a long time I believed them. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt dismissed, overlooked, or quietly brave, I want to hear from you. Drop your story in the comments. Tell me what you're building in silence. Tell me the dream they told you wouldn't work. And if you've come this far, if you've felt even one stitch of recognition in my words, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who's still sitting at that family table wondering if they'll ever be seen. Because here's the truth, you don't need permission to matter. You don't need a degree to have purpose. You don't need applause to start moving. You just need to remember what you already are. Worthy. So go build. Go create. Go carve your piece. And when they ask how you did it, tell them the truth. You stopped waiting for a seat at their table and built your own.